Executive function is the best predictor of AP success, of college success, of life success, hands down. Let's talk about the principles of integrating and embedding executive function into your lessons, and then I'm going to give you a couple of hopefully really good examples that you can take and put into your classroom like tomorrow. Do you ever quickly check a notification on your phone and the next thing you know, you've watched a 15-minute video about a guy restoring a piece of furniture? Has your spouse ever gone to Target for toothpaste and come home with like candles, socks, a picture frame, and still no toothpaste? Or have you ever fired off an email when you were really irritated and immediately wish you have waited 10 minutes? When adults slip up on executive function, it's mildly inconvenient. But when AP students slip, it looks like missing work, it looks like procrastination, looks like emotional shutdowns and incomplete projects. So today we're gonna break down what executive function actually is, why brilliant students can struggle in AP classes and when these skills are underdeveloped, and how educators can intentionally and realistically build executive function support into daily instruction. I'm Philip Bates, your host of From Classroom to Campus, and today's episode is called Why Smart Kids Fail AP Classes, the Executive Function Gap no one is talking about. I've got Megan Blessing here today. She's going to help me keep on track. She's going to kind of listen intently if there's something I leave out. And she might have some questions for me throughout the episode. So I'm excited to have Megan here. Hello, Megan.
Hello, Philip. I'm excited to hear about executive function.
Well, it sounds like you are. So I appreciate that. I appreciate that engagement. Hopefully you guys are engaged out there. Thanks for joining me today. You know, a lot of people define executive function in this really scientific, fancy way, and I'm not going to do that. I'm going to kind of give you a simple definition. But first off, a lot of people, you know, what I do like is they call executive function sometimes like the brain CEO, which is a really good comparison, or they might call it like the air traffic controller of the brain, even like the executive assistant. So those are all kind of names that executive functions get, which I think is good. But to me, it's really just a set of skills. And it's a set of skills that kind of help you plan, help you stay organized, help you manage your time, help you kind of emotionally regulate yourself, and really control your emotions, control follow through, all that kind of stuff. It's ultimately, I think, just adulting. For us adults, I just call it adulting. But for kids, it's a big deal. And for kids, working on executive function, they're working on, how to set a plan up. They're working on how to keep themselves distracted from things like TikTok. They're working on things like impulse control. We all want our teenagers to have impulse control. And, it's really executive function for a teenager is how to kind of stay on track and the skills involved in that. And we'll dive into that, pretty deeply today. I think a lot of problems that educators and adults have when working with teenagers, and specifically AP teachers, is a lot of times they'll look at a student and just kind of label that student lazy. And, or I've labeled my wonderful children lazy. And, it's not lazy. It's really oftentimes executive function. And so maybe the first thing to do for educators or for parents alike is when you're thinking about, is a student's behavior a product of being lazy, or is a student's behavior a product of executive function? And so a couple things you can kind of work through your mind is you can ask yourself, the student understands things in class all the time. They raise their hand, they participate, they seem to be all over it, but man, they are bombing tests. They are bombing quizzes. Well, that is executive function. That student doesn't know how to study. And so that's not lazy, that's definitely executive function. If you've got a strong writer and then you put a timed writing assignment in front of an AP student and they struggle like crazy, that's not lazy either. That's executive function. If you give some really great feedback to an AP student and they just absolutely melt down, that's executive function. So those are things that, are categorized, should be categorized that way. And I think it's important for educators to kind of keep that in mind. There's a lot of science behind executive function. We've been studying it for a long time. And a few things scientifically, you are sometimes just born with a lot of executive function. I was not someone blessed with a bunch of executive function when I was born.
Neither was I.
But you guys in your AP classes and in your classrooms and schools with your own children, you see that maybe your firstborn was the one that was born with a lot of executive function. And man, let's just pray for that younger one. I mean, that's the kind of stuff that's just a weird thing. Some kids are just born with more executive function than others. The other thing is, we look at some of our students and they just have these incredible models. They have these parents or these guardians that have just from a young age continuously modeled just amazing executive function and have set up systems for their children and done all these great things. Or maybe they just had this amazing first grade teacher that helped kind of set that bar of executive function. So that's another thing that science tells us is if students have great models and great systems throughout their lives, they develop executive function fairly quickly and efficiently. I think the other thing that science tells us is, and this is something, when I was in the classroom, we always would say, well, kids with ADHD, they're deficient in executive function. And they're the ones that really don't have executive function. Well, newsflash, everybody struggles with executive function, or at least most people do. And it's not just an ADHD thing. It's really everybody. And everybody can improve their executive function. And we can always improve students' executive function. So the other cool thing I think science related is you don't fully develop executive function skills until you're in your mid-20s. Probably for guys, it might be late 20s. But anyway, I think that's interesting because you might be teaching with a wonderful teacher right now who's maybe on the young side, and cut them some slack. Maybe they just quite haven't figured out their executive function skills yet. And ultimately, you can help them with that. You can help them provide that young AP teacher that teaches next to you some great systems. Megan, what you thinking?
I'm raising my hand. You can't see me. Can you explain what executive function skills are generally?
So it's a wide range of things, and it comes from, planning. It comes from being able to regulate emotions. It comes from being able to get yourself back on track. It comes from being able to set goals. It comes from being able to plan out goals. It comes from being able to build a strong, working memory, variety of things. All things that help you really be successful in tasks and be successful in AP classes. So does that help?
Got it. Thank
Excellent.
you.
You got it. In terms of educators, so, we've talked about the myth of ADHD stuff and everybody needs executive functions. And you're probably thinking to yourself, ultimately, I see a lot of executive function deficits throughout my classroom. I think executive function skills, have gotten worse over the years. Maybe educators would agree with me on that one, but I think they've gotten worse. And you kind of ask yourself, well, why has it gotten worse? Well, the phones don't help. The fact that we have a whole lot less social interaction, I don't think that helps. I think the biggest contributing factor is the adults in teenagers' lives are trying to do the executive function for the kid. And that would be parents trying to take over and knock out things for their kids, or teachers even taking on some things that really students should be taking on.
Helicopter parents,
snowplow parents, all that kind of stuff. But it's also, when I was a principal, I used to always ask teachers, are the kids working harder than you are? And if that's the case, we got a problem, because they should be working as hard as you for sure, and in some cases harder. And ultimately, if you're doing the executive function for the kids, then you're the one who's working the hardest. So, you might be listening to this and you're going, well, great, Philip, thank you so much. I need to now teach all this executive function, and that just adds another thing to my plate. First off, we're educators and we can do superpower things. Like, we're superheroes, we can do superpower things. Ultimately, I would tell you this: if you start doing executive function sole lessons just on executive function, like just a absolute lesson, just committed to executive function, you're going to bore the pants off of everyone. That is maybe the dumbest thing you possibly can do. Hello, today I'm going to do a lesson on, how to self-regulate.
I don't think that's so bad.
It's going to be boring for students. And ultimately, even on top of that, teachers don't have time for that. You've got to embed executive function into your instructional planning, or you won't be able to get it accomplished. And honestly, you're just going to bore students. So you're probably going, okay, well, what does that look like? Well, let's talk about the principles of integrating and embedding executive function into your lessons. And then I'm going to give you a couple of hopefully really good examples that you can take and put into your classroom like tomorrow. You want to make sure when you're embedding executive function, you want to make sure you got buy-in. So you want to be real upfront and honest with your students that, you are helping to, get their executive functioning skills up. You want to talk about when you've got good executive function and when you don't as a classroom teacher. And you really want to have conversations around it. I think a really great thing to explain executive function is to talk about, use a sports analogy. So, and Megan didn't like sports analogy. I'll do a sports analogy and then I'll do another analogy for you.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. So sports analogy, I got Zach over here laughing. So sports analogy number one, anytime you see a sports team warm up, it is very regimented. There is a system. They're not just out there like tossing the ball to each other. They are doing things to prepare for that game. They're doing things to prepare their body. So there's typically like a warm up that they're all doing together, whether or not they're stretching together, they're jogging around together. They're doing a systematic thing to get their body prepared for that athletic competition. There are things that teams do every single time to create routine to get them ready to play. So I'll use a non-sports analogy. I have seen many a fine arts performance. I have seen many a band perform, many an orchestra perform in my 18 years of public ed. There is a very systematic way that an orchestra gets ready to play. And it's always super interesting to me, and it looks kind of chaotic if you're watching in the crowd, but that particular student who is preparing the way their orchestra teacher has told them to is going to be ready to play when they tap on the whatever and use their
Whatevers.
Use their whatevers to get everything rolling. So I think, the point is you want to make sure you connect with your students when you're talking about executive function. So make sense?
Yes.
Excellent. You want to model. So when you are embedding executive function and you're modeling executive function, you got to do that a ton of times. Then you've got to transfer that to students.
How would you model it?
We'll go into that.
Okay.
We'll go into the specifics of that. But I think you modeling it is obviously not enough. I think it's a matter of you making sure your students can model it for you. I think it's important that your students can model for each other as well. So the modeling aspect is super important as far as that stuff is concerned. I think the other big aspect is that you set routines that aren't just verbal. So if I'm always verbally giving my students executive function type instructions or executive function routines, they're only bringing in so much of that verbal. You want to do it in a visual format. And I think making sure that you provide things not just verbally, but visually is really, really important.
Like what?
So it might be, a chart on the board. It might be a color-coded system. It might be, hearing specific sounds in class that say, okay, now we move on to this. All types of stuff like that. So let me actually start giving you some examples. I've got two that I've kind of prepared for today. Maybe some other ones will pop in my head. AP teachers, hopefully, and I'm sure you are doing this, is you're practicing AP questions every single day, because before you know it, that AP exam will be here in May. So if you're giving these fantastic, AP questions at some point during your lesson to build your students up, their stamina, their skills, you can embed executive function into that very, very easily. And the way you do that is you essentially start with modeling, reading that question, reading that prompt, reading that stimulus. You model the strategies that come along with that. You model good strategies and you model bad strategies, and you have your students pick out what's a good strategy, what's a bad strategy. So you routinely and consistently show them executive function. You show them frustrated. You show them when you're frustrated. You show them when, oh my gosh, you've taken too much time to annotate a particular paragraph. You show them your frustration when you don't understand something maybe. So you model that and you do that for students, and then you allow them to do it, and then you allow them to do it to each other peer-wise. And that's a great way to, start tackling questions and having students think about tackling questions in an executive function kind of way and not just diving into it. From there, if you use UWorld, which I highly suggest using UWorld for your AP practice, is you want to have students go through explanations to AP questions. And you want them to create an error log. So an error log is a fantastic executive function because it helps a student analyze their thinking, analyze their misconception.
What's an error log?
So an error log would essentially be a student answers an AP style question and gets it wrong, and then asks a few things to themselves. Like, did I not understand the concept? Did I not do the strategies my wonderful teacher has taught me, like annotate the poem? Did I run out of time? Did I not understand a vocabulary word somewhere embedded in the answer choices? Did I guess? There's a variety of things that an error log helps a student kind of self-regulate their thinking. And if you're not using error logs, you're not teaching your students how to use error logs, you're really missing the boat. So you take these great explanation from an AP question, and you have a student kind of walk through that particular explanation to maximize their learning. And really, executive function helps a student maximize their learning because they have a systematic way of not only going through the question, but going through the explanation. And, UWorld's a big partner of this podcast, so it's easy to talk about it. Check out UWorld. We actually do have really fantastic AP questions, and we've got fantastic explanations, and it will help you easily usher in an error log because you actually have something for the student to look at. Every day, educators work tirelessly to keep high school students motivated. But despite their best efforts, too many students still feel lost in a system that doesn't always support their success. At UWorld, we believe education is about unlocking a future full of possibilities. That's why our team of educators created teaching and learning tools for the advanced placement exams. Powerful, easy-to-use resources that help students master even the most challenging concepts. Content that features dynamic visuals created by world-class artists and interactive elements that spark curiosity and a love for learning. Our mission is to help every student reach their full potential. Whether that means earning valuable college credit by excelling on AP exams or achieving their dream SAT score, UWorld is here every step of the way. Every day, across the country, students are using UWorld to turn their aspirations into reality. Discover how UWorld can help your students succeed. Visit collegereadiness.uworld.com to learn more. All right, I got a second example. A second example of things that AP teachers like tomorrow can bring into their instruction when it comes to executive function. And that is the planning backward method. You can do this with a project. You can do this with a particular unit test. You can do it with an AP exam, but you basically get your students to plan backwards. So you set a date where the exam is, when the project's due, and you work backwards. And you start with some really guided questions. For example, what do you think is going to be on that unit test? What do you think you're going to are going to be challenging about this unit test? What are some skills over the past few weeks when I've taught the lesson that you've struggled with? What are some skills that you're just fantastic on? And that leads into, well, what do you need to study? What do you need to continue to practice? What do you need to plan for? Do you have events in these next couple weeks that are going to keep you from studying? Do you have a big competition? Do you have something coming on with band? Whatever it is, you help that student, I should say, lay out a particular plan and get really, granular with it. Day one, what am I doing? Day one, I'm reviewing my notes. What am I doing day two? Well, day two, I'm going to use some multiple choice practice. What am I doing day three? Well, I know there's going to be an essay FRQ on the unit test, so I'm practicing my FRQs. Day three, I'm going to look at my error log. You help and support a student, basically creating a really, really good plan. And you might be thinking, well, they're not going to do the plan. that's fine. Not every kid is going to do exactly what they laid out, but at least they realize what a plan is, what it takes to make a plan, what they need to be thinking about. And you will gradually have more and more students take you up on that because they will find success with planning backwards, essentially. Let's talk about, really what helps schools with executive function. And what helps schools with executive function is when everybody in the school is on the same page. Some of the most high-achieving high schools out there are ones that have executive function systems in place for every single student. For example, I'll use Avid for example. Avid has some, Avid demonstration site schools that are actually Avid demonstration site schools. Like really, they're actually doing what they're saying they're doing. You're going to walk into any classroom and you're going to see every single student taking notes the same way.
How's that?
Well, Cornell Notes is what Avid students use, and there's a very specific way they do that. And not only for note taking, you'll have students, essentially study the same. You'll have students asking the same type of questions. You'll have teachers performing the same embedded executive function lessons. So my point is as a classroom teacher, an AP teacher, if you're doing these amazing executive function embedded lessons, share it with your team, share it with your administrator. Because if you start to expand out these executive function lessons or these embedded executive function skills and lessons, you're going to get so much more, bang for your buck when all the teachers are doing it. So that's really my big advice there. I don't think that's any big surprise, but spreading the wealth is really, really critical. You're hearing my executive function talk, and you've probably got suggestions. You may have pushback for me. You may have things that are just like going, Philip, what about this? What about this? What about that? Let us know. Email us. Put something in the comments. We want to hear from you. I would love to do a follow-up on executive function. I'd love to do a great follow-up. I'd love to do executive function would be emotional intelligence because they kind of go together. And there's some great research that just came out that said the best way to evaluate an amazing teacher isn't the number of degrees they have, isn't the number of years they've taught, isn't anything more than how strong are they with emotional intelligence? How emotionally intelligent are they? And how can they use their emotional intelligence to benefit their students? So that's what I'm thinking about for kind of a future podcast is that it kind of goes along with executive function. So Megan, anything I left off?
Why do you think that schools are having such a hard time having a conversation about executive function? Why do you think that is?
Man, that's a good one. I think, number one, schools, teachers, everybody's just overwhelmed. And if you look at executive function as like another thing, you have a hard time having a conversation with it. If you look at executive function as it's everywhere and we just have to address it and embed it into everything we do, it becomes less of that. I think the other challenge is teachers sometimes are maybe not confident in teaching executive function or feel like that's a job for somebody else. If I'm being totally honest, people listening, maybe the ones listening I'm talking to, if you have the philosophy of, well, they should just figure out how to study on their own. It's just trial and error. That's how I learned it. That's not how you learned it. You either were born with executive function or your executive function got really, really good because you had this fantastic mentor, teacher, or parent who modeled it for you and taught it for you. So, did I answer your question?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. My other question is, how do teachers undermine students learning executive function without knowing? Like, what do they do? What are the ways that they do things for students that they probably shouldn't?
Gotcha. Yeah, that's good. So, how does executive function get taken over by, that AP teacher?
Yes.
And I think we'll start with this. Retakes. When an AP teacher gives a student a bunch of retakes, they're basically saying, don't worry about studying this for the first time because I'm going to give you a retake. And you're going to have another chance to do it.
Yeah.
And I'm going to keep you from having to study and learn it the first time. And that is really detrimental to students. when you give them a retake, because it prevents them from developing good study habits. I think not giving homework ever and just going, I can't give homework. There's no way I can give homework. They're not going to do it. I think, not giving homework, not giving projects, not giving things that help assess and develop a student's executive function is taking away the need for that student to develop executive function. Got it. Yeah.
That's all I got.
Okay. Good questions. Thank you for that. I want to kind of end with this. Executive function, guys, is the most predictable way to know that a student's going to be successful. So if you take a student with amazing executive function and you take a student with a super high IQ, give me the student with a high executive function every day of the week. And you've probably seen that. You've seen the smart kid that can't talk their way out of a paper bag. Executive function is the best predictor of AP success, of college success, of life success. Hands down. The research tells us that. Yes.
Wait, I do have one more question.
Okay.
Can you repeat again what the things are that teachers can do tomorrow in their classroom to help with executive function? I know there was the working backwards.
Yeah, I would say embedded into their instruction in ways that make sense. Model it. So we talked about, inserting it into daily activities. I gave the example of embedding it in AP questions that your students do, and planning things out for them. One thing I didn't hit on, and I'll give you another thing you can do tomorrow, is having your students explain how they're feeling. Which sounds like, well, of course I know how my students are feeling, and they always are allowed to express themselves. Think about that. And really think about the next lesson you teach, next interaction you have with your teenager. If you for your own kids, ask how you are really asking how they're feeling, and think about, are you giving them proper wait time and response time to express how they're feeling? Because if a student can't express how they're feeling, you can't support them and help them learn to emotionally regulate. Okay, so that is that. I hope that you enjoyed the episode. I hope you got at least one or two things out of it that you can bring back to your AP classroom. I'll leave you with this as well. We aren't just wanting kids to survive AP. We're wanting them to thrive, and we're wanting them to leave your classroom in a state where they've improved their executive function and they're going to be successful moving forward. So think about that. Thank you for all the incredible work you do out there, educators. If you're not an educator and you're listening to this and you're a parent, hey man, go tackle executive function with your own children. I'm still working on my beautiful children on executive function. We pretty much work on those things on a daily basis. So keep on working hard, Megan.
And live on the edge of your comfort zone. You're welcome.
Yes. Do that as well. Life begins at the edge of your comfort zone for sure.
That's it.
All right, folks. Have a fantastic, day, and thanks for listening. The opinions expressed by our guests and hosts are their own and do not necessarily reflect the views from Classroom to Campus, UWorld, or its affiliates. You can find us on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. Please remember to subscribe and leave a 5-star rating. That really helps us out. Thank you so much.